Hello, Grandmasters. Mike from the WCA. This is the position from the blog, all of you 4 o'clock birds, that said for you to checkmate black. So if you can, set up a chessboard and set this position up right in front of you and solve checkmate. If you don't have a board, then obviously you can do it from a video, but I would like you guys to get in the habit of occasionally setting up a board when you're following something online with a video. I know your generation, everything is video and much easier for you to learn that way. However, when you play in real games, you have real pieces in your hand. So practicing at home, being in a calculating position and having real pieces in your hand can really pay off for you, okay? All right, so solve this. You can pause the video. Make sure you know how to do that. If you're watching it on YouTube, just hit the space button. The video should stop. Put your head down on your chessboard, solve the mate. Okay, I hope you found Queen F7 check, which forces a checkmate. Only 2 legal moves. King goes in the corner or the rook takes. So if the king goes in the corner, very simple checkmate to follow. We just take the rook, queen has to take, and then rook takes, checkmate. And then if you go back here, if the rook takes the queen, you give a check by taking with the pawn. And again, there's 2 legal moves, and he loses either way. If he goes in the corner, we turn the pawn into Big Mama. The other Big Mama takes, rook takes, game is finished, I tell you. After pawn check, what's the other move? King can go to F8, and hopefully you all see mate in 1, which is rook E8. Okay, beautiful finish to that game. Maybe you can hear the siren in the background. They're coming for the black king. Doesn't look pretty for him. Anyway, let's take a look at the starting position again. Go back. If you have this position on your board, now calculate the checkmate one more time. This time, don't move a single piece. Make sure you see it. Okay. Now, I want you to go back, and if you look at the blog, I want you to set up position number 2. So you could either get it from the blog or just look up at your screen. I'm going to show it to you right now. Here we go, and that's it. All right, so the picture that's on the screen now is actually the game 9 moves earlier. Okay, on the blog it said set this position up. And now let's figure out how they got there. Now, with the new position in front of you, let's start talking about what's going on. A couple of things should come to mind right away. You should see that white has the bishop pair. You have a bishop here on G2. Oops, now he's on F3. Go back, mister. You have a bishop on B2. Really strong piece. This is unopposed. Actually, both bishops are. We talked about that in the other videos. Black doesn't have any bishops to fight these guys on the diagonals, so the only way that black can stay in this game is to get those knights posted in the center of the board. They do have center pawns here that can act as little anchors, and there are 3 center pawns left in the game, which means the board is not completely open. So the knights have a chance if they could ever anchor themselves somewhere on one of these squares. For example, if I could put a knight on C4, then black certainly is going to get some play. The issue for black in this starting position, sorry about that, these pieces have a mind of their own. Let's take a look at this knight here on A7, which when you first glance at this should immediately come to mind. I mean, black's knight is out of play. So one objective for black would clearly be to get that knight back into the game. The C file is wide open and can be contested or fought for both sides. So again, if you have the position set up correctly, you can just put your head down and kind of follow my voice along with what you see. If I go too quickly or if you want something repeated, just pause your video and go back, but get in the habit of really digging into these set positions. So again, let's try it again. Pause your video and come up with your own analysis for what you think is going on in this position. Okay, a few more things. King safety, kind of hard to judge. I put this on a computer. The computer likes white. but not by a winning margin. It just thinks, you know, those bishops, there's so much more play and there's so much more potential in white's position that the computers kind of fancy white in this position. So what did you guys come up with? You know, when we get to class on Sunday, I'm going to put this position on the board and we can share it. I'd really, really want your feedback, okay? All right, a couple of other things here. If you have the two bishops from all of your chess training at the WCA or wherever else that you take chess, you should immediately be looking to open up the game. And here there's really two reasons for that. The first, you own the bishop pair, and secondly, black has a minor piece out of play. And there's been a whole book written, I think it was called the Tarish Principle. I forgot who wrote it, about like how positions can be entirely bad, like really rotten, if you have one piece out of the game. You know, that principle is based on master play. At the lower levels, as you're working your way up, you can be down a whole piece and still have chances. But when you get to that master level, even one piece out of play can be an issue. So again, to repeat, white in this position played the move e4. And it's clear why, again, opening up the game with the knight out of play and having the two bishops. And black, to their credit, decided to take the pawn with the knight, and their objective was, well, if I take this way, and black did, and white continued trading, I'm going to get the following position where I took the bishop pair away from white. So now the question is going to be, you took the bishop pair away from white, so why did white go in for this? It was pretty clear that black was going to be able to capture on e4, so white anticipated this position. Now, if you've been moving the pieces along, wonderful. If not, you can go back on your chessboard and just flip back to in the video to get to the point, to the starting position, and then move the pieces with me. White played e4. Knight takes, bishop takes, pawn takes. All of this is happening on the e4 square. Queen takes e4. The more you do this with the pieces in your hands physically, the more that e4 square gets kind of ingrained into your brain. I mean, look at the queen here on the video. You can look up at the screen, sitting on e4. Now look down on your chessboard. And in time, I mean, most of us know already that the e4 square is white, but the more you do this, the more you really get a feel for the chessboard, not just the pieces, but the board. That's your territory. That's, you know, that's the field that you play on. If this was a musical instrument, this is the instrument. You have to know every key on the piano, just like every square on the chessboard. Okay, so let me put a couple of highlights up. So you can look up at the screen now, and you'll see the pawns both on your board and on the screen here for black on b7 and b6, and then the pawn on e6. They're isolated and double isolated and terribly weak. The minor piece configuration, the black knight and the white bishop, clearly favors white. So the structure is in white's favor, as well as the placement of the minor pieces. Since there's action on both sides of the board, that tends to favor the bishop for the endgame, or any position really, but here you cannot call this an endgame. Remember, the primary purpose of an endgame is to promote a pawn, while here it's clear that with all of the heavy pieces still on the board, and the heavy pieces are the rooks and the queens, there are many middle game ideas or motifs still going on. We already know that because this ends in a checkmate. Okay, so what else can we highlight? What else has changed from the original position? Let's take a look again. So this long diagonal here, I actually have it on the wrong square. Let me fix that for you. Did that work? Yes, it did. So if you look at the white squared bishop, that's a lot of territory that piece is controlling. This rook on f8 for black, doing a nice job, but again, I highlighted that knight. So it's clear that black's next idea or move, which was actually knight to c6, he really needed to get this knight back into the game. Now how to continue. Masters attack weaknesses. They do it in their sleep. Don't get fancy trying to create other weaknesses on the board when they already exist. So what is the one weakness that you're staring at? It's the e6 pawn. So how to attack it? Now, don't change this on your chessboard, but I want you to look up at the screen so you see the screen that we're looking at now, and let's jump ahead for a moment to the position that you started with. This is the checkmating position. Do you see the differences? One of the primary differences is, well, the minor pieces are gone, but the F file is completely open now. So it seems that after the knight got back into the game here, and we created or had this weakness on e6, that white's intention was to eventually push the F pawn and go after this pawn. Now, here's why that works. Masters know in advance that if there's a weakness and you attack it, now he attacked with his A rook, if that pawn is defended as it was here, then the question becomes, why would a move like f4 be effective? Because once f4 is played, the move f5 can always be played later. And very, very often, when you have pieces like this lined up behind this pawn, the pawn is going to be pinned. So if I can play f4, f5, I can get a lot of play based on the fact that I'm lined up behind that pawn. I hope that makes sense to you. So back here after knight c6, after rook a1, there's the weakness, and you should understand why he moved the A rook and not the F rook. Because again, a lower rated player will see that F rook and go, hey, what'd you do to my rook? It's awful. You know, it's not doing anything. Why couldn't I move that rook here? Well, the same thing happens at the top of the board, doesn't it? Black moves the A rook to defend the weakness. And again, why? Well, his F rook is already on a half open file, and white's rook here, certainly the next move, f4. So I hope you guys understand why these moves are being played. Okay, this is another common idea in chess. Rook f5 played by black. It's a blockading move. It's designed to stop this pawn from pushing any further. Now, it could run into the move g4, which is fine for white, but you'd have to be a little bit careful, because if you continue up the board, this is not really pinned, but the fact that you move the g pawn up the board would allow queen d6, and if you take my e pawn, then the queen comes in with check. And if you move your king, I'm going to pick off another pawn. That's going to be very unpleasant. So you may have to block with the queen. And now, if the queens come off the board, and you can watch this on the screen, you don't have to move these, make these moves on your board. But if you look up, you'll realize that black is immediately going to start to harass that pawn. And if you move it to keep it protected, the knight just goes back to where it was, and black is getting comfortable here. I still like white a little bit. I like the idea of having this long-range bishop here, but this pawn, I don't know how long it's going to stay on the board. It feels to me the black's going to corral it or surround it at some point, and then the material is going to be equal again. So after rook f5, white was not in a hurry to push this pawn. So what they did first is they played rook e2, and that is designed to triple up if necessary. Okay, the rook swung over to d5, and that was a slight mistake, because after rook d5, now the pawn pushed. So you can't take the pawn, obviously, because you'll lose your rook with check, and then you're going to lose the whole house. But the same idea occurred in the game. Remember when I pushed this g pawn up, and then the black queen found her way in here? Well, she tried it again in the game, except there's a major difference. Now, the pawn, after it took on e6, you don't really have that whole queen idea. It's very different, because now you're taking the pawn. You're actually taking the whole pawn, but with the rook on e2, you get hit with rook g2, and your position is going to collapse. Black is dead lost here. The rook is hanging over here. The queen is hanging here. The game is over. So it's so funny that you can give the pawn away this time and be completely winning. So I hope that you're following along and that it makes sense, more importantly. So let's get this position on the board for you, where you should see the white pawn just took on e6. And here it's critical that black to hang on. Their position is not fun. Maybe, just maybe, a move like rook g5, putting pressure on that pawn with the rook, might keep them in the game, but they made a critical mistake. They actually lost in one move. They played knight to d4. Now, you can't really blame black. He's trying to get into a heavy piece ending where the superior bishop is gone, but it's just a forced sequence of trades now. Bishop takes, rook takes, and then after queen f3, that battery on the f-file was enough to win the game. You can't cover that back rank so well. One line I looked at was putting the queen to the back, but there's a very instructive way to win this game. You can look up at the screen. You don't need to do this on your board, but simply queen f7 check, king goes in the corner, and now e7, which is really, really strong. If they make an escape square, the cleanest way to win this game is to just take the rook with your queen, and taking back is pretty much forced, and then just simply rook f8 is going to win the black queen and win the game. Okay, so let's go back and put this position on the board. You just played queen f3, and you'll see that it's getting a little uncomfortable for black, but he lost in one move. He didn't see the mate coming. He played rook f8, and this is the same exact position we started with. All right, I hope you got a lot out of this, and that you really worked hard at understanding how these guys got to this position, okay? Because they are a couple of masters, so if you could follow the ideas, you're on your way. All right, Grandmasters.